So thanks again for joining us and welcome. My name's Robby Maynor. I serve as the director of our Communities and Transportation program here at the Conservation League. I'm new to this specific position, but I've been with the league for about 3 years, working on land use, conservation, and transportation projects in Berkeley and Dorchester counties. So while I'm new to this role, I'm not new to the work, and I'm really excited to get to work with new folks in new ways throughout the region. So this evening, we're here with our executive director, Faith Rivers James, to talk about the redevelopment of Union Pier, focusing specifically on the environmental elements of the project. Conservation League has been engaged in the initial planning process for the redevelopment for months. We've been working to shape the future of this terminal and cruise operations for years. We've been collaborating closely with a coalition of community-based organizations, all striving to ensure that this once-in-a-lifetime redevelopment opportunity at Union Pier results in a vibrant, inclusive, and resilient community that enhances the unique and historic character of the Charleston Peninsula. So we're glad you're here, that we have this opportunity to talk about Union Pier, the process ahead, and some of the upcoming opportunities for public engagement. As for how this webinar will progress, I'll be providing a bit of background on the process and where we stand currently in that process. Then I'll hand it over to Faith, and she'll share with you a little bit more about the Conservation League's history on this issue and some of the major elements we're taking into consideration as we evaluate the redevelopment proposal. And then we'll share some questions that we have about the project that so far have still gone unanswered. After Faith provides an overview of the project and our priorities, there will be an opportunity for you to ask questions. So as we go, please submit any questions you have in the chat, and we will address as many as we can at the end. We're going to share a screen here. And I want to start by making sure that we're all on the same page about the site that we are talking about when we say Union Pier. So this property is a 65-acre waterfront site in Charleston's downtown historic district. It is on Concord Street, right beside Fleet Landing Restaurant and across the street from the Customs House. It is owned by the South Carolina Ports Authority and has been used for shipping, port operations, and most recently as a cruise terminal. In 2022, due to pressure from the Conservation League and other local partner organizations, the Ports Authority announced it would end its home port contract with Carnival Cruise Lines and will only support short-term port of calls going forward. As a result, a large portion of Union Pier will be redeveloped as a mixed-use residential and commercial space. To accomplish this, the Ports Authority is currently requesting that the property be rezoned from its current industrial zoning to what's called a planned unit development, or PUD for short. This allows for an applicant to effectively create their own zoning requirements within a set of guidelines provided by the city. For the last few months, the Ports Authority and their consultant Lowe have been creating their PUD that will determine how the property is developed and has now submitted those plans to the City of Charleston for review. It has to go through Technical Review Committee, then Planning Commission, and then finally City Council. Other recent examples of the rezoning to PUD process in the city of Charleston are Magnolia and Laurel Island, each of which has taken years for plans to be developed and approved. So in a nutshell, the Ports Authority is requesting that the Union Pier property be rezoned to accommodate a mixed-use development, and the vetting process at the city level is just getting underway. Now, with that shared understanding, I'll turn it over to Faith to talk about some of the Conservation League's priorities for Union Pier.
Good evening, everyone. As Robby said, thank you for joining us to talk about the environmental impacts at Union Pier. As you may have seen last week, Charleston's historic neighborhoods were named one of the 11 most endangered places by the National Trust for Historic Preservation. And it has really been an important designation. We received the designation due to the threat of incompatible development at Union Pier along the Cooper River waterfront. From Ansonboro to Charlestown, the communities surrounding Union Pier face uncertainty about their homes and about how their neighborhoods will be affected by the massive scale of this proposed development. And all of us living in Charleston County will be impacted by the scope and scale of the development and the proposed financing options that the Ports Authority seeks. Of course, we don't want the heart of our downtown waterfront to continue on as a barren parking lot. And folks are rightly excited about the opportunity to open access to this beautiful waterfront for all of Charleston citizens, as well as our visitors. And as environmentalists, we are anxious to uncover the living shorelines that have been hidden in darkness under this pier for generations. And we look forward to seeing thriving habitats in these marshes. But we, along with our partners at the Preservation Society and the Historic Charleston Foundation, all firmly believe that there is a better way to approach this once-in-a-lifetime project. The developer-led plan before the city fails to meet our expectations for a world-class waterfront that is seamlessly integrated with the surrounding neighborhoods. Despite the pretty artistic watercolor renderings, what the Port Authority's developer has proposed is a plan that allows for a densely populated mass of tall, block-sized buildings. Personally, I agree with Mayor Tecklenburg that this plan needs to go on a diet and get a haircut. And then to make matters worse, these massive buildings will tower over us from a high and dry platform that's elevated 10 feet above Washington Street. The Union Pier development will be a massive fill and build city on a hill, but rather than shining, this city will threaten to literally rain down over the streets of Ansonboro and the market. And so we're really at a pivotal moment in shaping the future of Union Pier. And this project will leave a lasting legacy on the city of Charleston. And we have to protect and preserve this crown jewel of our city's waterfront for the next generation of Charlestonians to come. And we only have one chance to get this right. And so with that in mind, I'd like to share with you the Conservation League's 4 primary priorities for a vibrant and sustainable development at Union Pier. First, we are focused on cruise infrastructure that reduces emissions from idling ships. Second, we want more green space to balance density and give us all a place to breathe and appreciate the beauty of our harbor. Third, we must have bike and pedestrian connectivity that empowers us to reduce our carbon footprint. And last but not least, resilient solutions to our flooding challenges. The Conservation's previous work on Union Pier focused predominantly on cruise operations. The port's announcement that it would be ending its home port contract with Carnival was a step forward, because home port ships equate to thousands of cars driving through the historic neighborhoods adjacent to Union Pier and a sea of parking on site. Instead, Union Pier will only host short-term port of call ships, which means passengers will be arriving on foot instead of in cars. But it does not address all of our concerns with cruise operations. We want to see the Ports Authority commemorate the voluntary agreement to limit cruise to port of call operations. And under the port of call plan, we will have cruise ships idling in the harbor, introducing significant amounts of air pollutants. So cruise operations continue to pose environmental challenges for this site and its surrounding neighborhoods. And so at the Conservation League, we've asked the Ports Authority to firmly commit to providing electricity to cruise ships from the existing grid on shore, rather than forcing ships to rely on diesel-fueled engines while they're docked. Now, this requires more than just a commitment to evaluate. What we need is a substation at Union Pier to provide electric power to these ships from the shore grid. And we don't think this is asking too much. Shore power is not an unusual or unique concept. Indeed, ports around the world have relied on it for many years, including many ports in the United States. On the East Coast, Port Everglades in Florida recently completed its master plan to add shore power to its 8 cruise terminals. So the plan for Union Pier can be better, and it must include assurances that the infrastructure needed for shore power is integrated into the new development. Our second priority for the redevelopment of Union Pier is ensuring firm commitments to provide adequate open green space on site. That green space must be available and make it accessible to residents from all over Charleston. Now, by open green space, we're simply just talking about uncovered land with natural features. And these can range from pathways to gardens to parks. But let's be clear, Union Pier is a public space. Much of it belonged to the people of Charleston, and now it is in the hands of the people of South Carolina through our Ports Authority. We should expect that this plan would provide maximum opportunities for our people, all of our people, to enjoy the wonderful views and revived marshes in store at Union Pier. And while we are encouraged by the Ports Authority accepting our recommendation that we open up a promenade around the Bennett Rice Mill facade, more must be done. In our view, the current proposal fails to meet the city's minimum open space requirements for a planned unit development. The city of Charleston requires 20% of a development to be left as open green space. The intent of this requirement is to ensure that we don't crowd out our developments and end up with no space to breathe and see the sunshine. And open space is open land. But this developer plan wants to count a section of the Cooper River as open green space in their development. And now, in my past life, I was a property law professor. In all of my years of teaching and researching, I've never seen anyone claim a free-flowing river as open land. That stretches the bounds. So given that Union Pier is located on public land, the sale and redevelopment should provide more than the bare minimum in terms of public assets like green space. Additionally, it is important to note that there are no assurances that all the developers' plans and drawings will come to fruition, as there is a multiplicity of state and federal permits required for this proposed development to take place. Now, given the uncertainty of the permitting processes, the plan should include provisions to guarantee that green open space requirements are reached regardless of permitting challenges. And we would also like to see assurances that community benefits, including parks and green open space, that those be established in incremental phases as the build out of the site occurs. Green open space should not be the last thing on the punch list. The Conservation League's third priority is connectivity. We need to see a plan for Union Pier that provides safe passage for all people, be they bikers, seniors, or the masses of children that are sure to ride their bikes and run through this site to the recreational island park. Union Pier must be designed to utilize streets that are explicitly engineered and built to slow down motorists. The intersections must be safe for pedestrians and cyclists and easily navigable for people with mobility challenges. And we need dedicated bike facilities for cyclists. Now, with 1,600 residential units currently proposed for Union Pier, which translates to roughly 4,000 new residents, the plan should include commitments to integrate with Low Country Rapid Transit, Peninsula Transit Service, bike share facilities, and ferry services. Ensuring that residents have multiple options for everyday commutes and trips for necessities like groceries is really paramount. Visitors will need an alternative way to access the pier without driving and paying for expensive parking. Otherwise, the development will greatly compound traffic congestion and raise safety issues across the entire peninsula. Now, our final and perhaps most important priority for Union Pier is resilience. We must ensure that we have proven, realistic, and sustainable flooding solutions to contend with our rising tides. No matter how you slice it, our streets are flooding and our water tables are rising. If you live downtown, you drive through the crosstown or just jog down Lockwood Boulevard, you're more than likely going to see sunny day flooding more now than any time in recent history. We must fight back. And resilience should be incorporated into the design of Union Pier, and green infrastructure must be included as a sustainable part of that solution. And now by green infrastructure, I'm referring to systems of connected open green space and parks that basically conserve the ecosystem. Green infrastructure utilizes things like native plantings, bioswales, permeable pavement, and rain gardens to mimic the natural water cycle. And these green spaces capture rain and surge with the purpose of slowing down, storing, or filtering stormwater. This developer's plan talks about green infrastructure, but it doesn't walk the walk. If you believe in green infrastructure, then you'd put it in the PUD. Images and options of green bioswales don't mean a lot if the green infrastructure is not required in the PUD document. Now, of course, maintaining that green infrastructure, that's also an important challenge we face. And we need a long-term management plan from the developer, including financial support for maintaining that green infrastructure so that the city and we taxpayers are not on the hook to pay for flooding and stormwater challenges in this privately owned neighborhood. And as Robby said earlier, we truly believe that there is a potential for a wonderful redevelopment plan for Union Pier, but we have to make this plan better. We don't simply need something designed with Charleston in mind. We need a plan with Charleston at its heart, respecting the surrounding neighborhood's scale, their view sheds, and their resilience needs. The plan must protect our children, our cyclists, and senior citizens traversing the site. And so we need your help and input to encourage these developers to make this plan more like Charleston in our hearts and at its core. And so we look forward to fielding some questions from you tonight. So Robby, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Faith, for walking us through those priorities. Before we launch into the full Q&A, I want to give a brief rundown of the process in terms of what's coming next and some key upcoming dates. So the next opportunity for public engagement with decision makers at the City of Charleston will be through the Planning Commission. This is a group of citizens appointed by City Council who review the proposal and make a recommendation as part of the overall decision-making process. Essentially, Planning Commission has three options when reviewing a project: approve, deny, or defer. Planning Commission currently has a special meeting scheduled to discuss Union Pier and receive public comments on June 7th at 5 p.m. At that meeting, folks from the community can voice their hopes and concerns for this project. Afterwards, Planning Commission could choose to make a recommendation or defer a decision to a later meeting. We highly encourage all of you to attend this meeting and share your voice to help shape the future of Union Pier. Of course, Planning Commission is a recommending body. City Council makes the final decision. So either way, there will be additional opportunities to engage on this project in the future. Once they receive a recommendation from Planning Commission, City Council could put this up for a vote right away or wait up to a year to gather more information to inform their decision. We sincerely hope that City Council will take all the time they need to make a fully informed decision, does not rush this decision that will reshape the character of the historic Charleston Peninsula forever. Now with that, we'll use the rest of the time tonight to try and answer some of the questions that we've been receiving. And Faith and I will each take a few of these questions and bounce them back and forth, but we'll start with Faith. So Faith, I've heard people talking about the need to slow this process down. How would that happen?
Well, Robby, it's an essential question. And frankly, you mentioned some of the planned unit developments that have taken months and months and years to get through the process. And so we think it's important to slow down this process. And that's essential because there's so many questions that we all have. For our city councilmen to be able to make a fully informed set of decisions about this plan, we need a lot more details. We don't know the details of the financing mechanism that they've suggested. There are many unanswered questions. At this point, as the plan heads towards the technical review with the city, we still don't have the details of their housing plan. They have withdrawn the original plan and they're holding that for a later time. And so we think it's essentially vitally important that the city have more information at their fingertips so that they can make an informed decision. So that's why everyone's focused on pausing the PUD so that the developer who is leading this process would be able to give an account for some of the unknowns that really inform a city's ability to make a good decision.
Thank you. I've got another one here, and I think I can take this one. I can't attend the Planning Commission meeting. How else can I engage, and how do I stay up to date with the status of this project? So the Planning Commission meeting on June 7th is kind of the next and best opportunity to engage. There are certainly other methods. We will be hosting, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, an information session on June 1st at Tradesman Brewing to talk more about this in a more casual setting and be able to answer some questions and hopefully have some more information then. And our partners at Historic Charleston Foundation are also hosting an information session, I believe May 18th, and we'll continue to keep you posted on this. If you can't attend the Planning Commission meeting in person, you can submit comments through the city's online portal, which is also extremely helpful. So would recommend submitting comments there. And then there are also obviously other ways to engage more broadly in advocacy, such as sharing some of this information with your friends and neighbors, writing letters to the editor, really helping to get the word out there, and know that there is still a lot that has to be fleshed out in this process.
Great. Well, I see a question here from someone, and the question is, if City Council slows things down, can the Ports Authority still sell this land to a developer for the big bucks they're seeking before the city makes a decision within a year? So as you noted, yes, the city has a year to consider this plan. If they do not act at the end of a year, then the plan is automatically denied. The Ports Authority has the ability to sell the property, but what the PUD gives them the ability to do is to rezone the property. And so if they sold it in its current state, they have the right to do that, but eventually anything that goes there will need to be rezoned. And so of course, to get the highest and best dollar that they're looking for, they probably want to make sure that the site is zoned for the uses that the buyer has in mind. So of course, they always have the right, if they are holding the property at this time, but certainly because they are a part of us and we are a part of the state of South Carolina, we hope that they'll work with us to be sure that what goes on this site is something that's productive for the Ports Authority, but also that is accommodating for the citizens of Charleston. We support the Ports Authority in all kinds of ways. It is an important employer in our community, but at the same time, we also pay a lot of sacrifice. And so we hope that the Ports Authority will work hand in hand with the citizens of Charleston, with our organizations, and the city of Charleston to make sure that this site comes out with a good use.
Great. I've got another one here and we'll take it. Why isn't there a city-generated master plan that shows the public design alternative? I think typically when considering a rezoning, the city and really any entity would review its comprehensive plan. And so that's a plan that guides all of the land use decisions in a community, usually on a 10-year time horizon. And so you might know that the city of Charleston fairly recently adopted a new comprehensive plan guiding a lot of the development throughout the city, and even are taking up some subsequent plans to look at zoning updates based on that comprehensive plan. But this Union Pier site was left out of the comprehensive plan and designated as a future planning area. So whereas when most rezonings would come before a body, you would look at it, and one of the first things that a decision maker would do is compare that back to the comprehensive plan and what the community-based vision for that area is, and see if that rezoning fits in with what the comprehensive plan calls for. In this specific instance, we don't have that opportunity because there was not a specific plan included in the comp plan for Union Pier. And so what we're really seeing is a two processes that are happening at the same time. We've got this PUD proposal coming from the port and the developer saying what they would like to do on this property. And then we're designing a comprehensive plan designation alongside that, which is not traditionally how the comprehensive plan is utilized and not how you achieve a holistic and community-led vision in your planning.
Great. And Robby, I see a question here about density. And the question is, considering that living densely can reduce carbon footprints by more than half, and considering that sprawl, going out past Ondon is a threat to our local ecosystems, wouldn't the density in this plan be a good thing for the environment? And so, the question is this the kind of thing we should be encouraging? We are not against density. We're just asking that this site respect the scale and scope as they pledged to do in their PUD document of seamlessly integrating with the surrounding neighborhoods. And so the question becomes, how tall is enough? And how dense does it, how dense does it have to be to meet those requirements? So our hope is that we will have more open space, and we think 4 stories is enough. Considering that this site is going to be elevated 10 feet above Washington Street, we think that having 5 stories is plenty high enough, plenty dense enough for this site to continue. They are asking for 1,600 units of housing. And so that's a lot of people, that's density, but I certainly think we can have both density and beauty and respect the neighbors in the surrounding neighborhoods all at the same time.
Yeah, that's a great answer, Faith. And I think this is not an either or consideration. We're in the early stages of a long-term planning process that the community and the city and the developer and organizations like ours will all participate in to shape. And so making sure that it is at a scale that does fit in with Charleston is key, not focusing on the numbers. I think kind of related to that is another question that I've got here that says, if the city does not rezone, what are the options and alternatives? So that's a good question, and that also fits into this. It's not an either or. The city could deny rezoning this, and a developer could come back with another proposal in a year with a different proposal or for another rezoning request. And property owners have the right to request rezonings at any time. So this is not about denying, like full scale denying the rezoning. It's not about just taking what's offered because it's the best that we are going to get. This is about being, boots on the ground, engaged in the process from start to finish, vetting this proposal at all levels and making sure that the end result, whatever it may be, is befitting of Charleston and of the Low Country, and that it has, respects surrounding communities and the environment and the waterways and everything else. So I would say, there is never like an end to like a property that can always be requested for rezoning for different uses. And that could be, something that we think about down the line, but we're really not at this point saying, don't rezone and don't do anything there. As Faith kind of stated, the best and brightest future of Union Pier is not a huge concrete slab. We're on board with that and looking for redevelopment opportunities. We just want to be engaged in the process and make sure that it is the best product that it can be at the end of the day.
Great. And I see one here, Robby, I'll take. They asked for some clarification about the open space. And the question was, am I referring to the park that's over the old pier? So I'll explain. What they have proposed on the water's edge of this site is to maintain a pier. And we were successful in asking them to separate the pier that will service the cruise ships from the island park, so that the park is there for our residents and taxpayers, and the cruise folks can stay on their own side. But that island pier will be separated from the main land area by open water. They're going to uncover the water and the marsh area underneath part of that front side of the pier. And so when they are uncovering that, they are considering that uncovered river and marsh and the island park as open space. I've never seen anybody count a part of a river as open space. We firmly believe that the PUD ordinances intend that the open space be on land, because the intent is to sort of break it up so we don't end up with these massive, densely filled up parcels of development. This enables us to sort of break things up, have some space, have some light, and some air. That we need those winds coming off of the river if you're anywhere downtown in the dead of summer. And so it really is odd, we think, for them to count what's over on the water side of the critical line as a part of their open space sacrifice in the development. Anything that's over the critical line is in a different space because we, the people of South Carolina, own that through the public trust. So that is our challenge with that site. We think they should reserve the open space, both usable and all total open space. We count that on the landward side of that critical line.
Great. I've got another one here. Street and flooding maintenance was mentioned as an issue the developer should account for. Can you help me understand? Is the entire PUD considered private roads and infrastructure then? Would they not be considered city streets once built? So yes, streets typically would be conveyed to the city and the city would maintain that. And really the plan for most of the infrastructure in place, the city, the streets, the infrastructure, the parks, the current proposal puts all of that in the city's, maintenance regime. And I think that is where we really are concerned, not so much about the streets, maybe not so much about the parks, although there are concerns with those, but particularly about the stormwater infrastructure. So this site, replacing what's there on Union Pier now with the type of development that is proposed is going to reshape the way that water has, collects, moves, runs throughout the site and into surrounding areas, and is going to require a lot of stormwater infrastructure to be able to make sure that that water does not have negative impacts on the site or in places next door. And so that stormwater infrastructure in particular, when we're looking at the fill and build development in the floodplain along the water's edge is a really big question mark. And so I think the developers have said, we're going to use world-class stormwater infrastructure. It's going to take care of that. You don't have to worry about that. But there has not been consideration taken for if and when that stormwater infrastructure is insufficient as sea levels rise and groundwater rises and conditions continue to change, who is going to be responsible for the maintenance of that stormwater infrastructure or the improvements if it's not sufficient when there are things next door, or even repairs when things happen. And so while the city will ultimately be the long-term stewards, we think that there needs to be a plan put in place that has contingency elements that help fund and provide that necessary maintenance. Otherwise, the city is going to be on the hook for that, and therefore the taxpayers are going to be on the hook for that. And there's really only two options for that: is it's going to cost more money to improve it, or it's not going to be improved and it's not going to function properly. So when we're looking at an area that traditionally, being in a floodplain, a fill and build proposal along the water's edge, we're really looking at to be resilient. That is not the most ideal place to locate this number of units. The answer that stormwater infrastructure will take care of it, well, maybe right now, maybe immediately, and maybe in the short term, but we need long-term commitments, because once this is built, it's a permanent fixture of the city, and the city will be responsible for maintaining.
And if I could follow up on Robby's point about the infrastructure, it is important for folks to understand. We've been working on this really since almost my first day here at the League, and we've had engineers looking at this. They're giving us broad parameters, but they haven't given us the details of the engineering, because they say, well, that happens at concept plan or at site plan. But we don't get the concept or the site plan until the PUD is approved. So they're asking the city to blindly approve their PUD without assurances that the engineering system that they propose will work. They're promising us that their city on a hill will, in wedding cake tier form, grab all the water from their site and push it right off into the harbor. Interesting concept. How will we know until we see the details of their plan? In terms of financing, they're telling us, oh, we're going to do a TIF, a tax incremental financing system, which basically means that they would reduce their tax payments to the city, the school district, and the county, and use their money to fund their own infrastructure. It's a great deal if we could all take our homeowners association dues from our taxes, but that's not the way it works, and we don't have the details yet. And so it's really important that we see the logistics of the engineering, that we understand fully the implications of the increment financing plans that they are considering, and that we have outside experts give us their perspective on whether those tax increment plans would work. Some of those things don't really work unless there are a lot of turnovers and transfers. And so it's still an open question as to whether what they proposed is something that's feasible and sustainable in the long run for our city.
I think we've got time for maybe 2 more questions. So I've got one that I would like to take, and then we'll let Faith take one more. So this one is, the city has a comprehensive water plan underway. Should this project wait until that roadmap be completed? Also, the flood mitigation that has been presented is vague and untested. Given the sea level rise affecting our city, we should have a clear idea of how to manage water here. Who's responsible for resilience in this PUD? This is a great question. And the first answer, I'll kind of go from the bottom up, is who is responsible for resilience in this PUD is the developer who is writing the PUD based on a very sort of limiting guidelines provided by the city on what can be included in a PUD. But ultimately, it is the developer that is putting forth what the plans are. Now, we do hope that the city of Charleston City Council, when they have the opportunity to review and ask questions, will take those planning efforts into account and hold them to the high standard that we have set for water management in the city as we continue to build out our resilience. And I think, yes, it's a great flag that the city does have a comprehensive water plan underway. I believe fully that this should be in accordance with that, and that as we're on a citywide level developing this comprehensive plan, that this project should not be exempt from that. It should be held to those standards. And I think is really more of the process of like that we're talking about of how fast this is moving compared to, we don't have a designation for the site in the comprehensive plan. We have not completed the water plan, and the city just launched last month a complete rezoning or a complete rewrite of the zoning ordinance to reflect ideally what was said in the comprehensive plan, elevation-based zoning, to make sure that we are building with the most density in the least flood prone, most resilient places on high ground. And so, yes, I think that there are many plans. We've been planning for resilience in the city for years and have lots of good plans, including the Dutch dialogues, that this project does not seem to conform to at this stage. So yes, I think that it should be in conformance with all of these excellent resilient plans that the city has been investing in the last few years. All right, Faith, we've got one more to close it down.
All right. Well, there's one in here asking about the plan for green space and parks and waterfront access, specifically for walking and biking on the harbor. And I know everyone will remember that it was Mayor Riley's vision that we would have a walking path that would go all the way around the peninsula. And so there is an opportunity here, a great opportunity, to open up a pathway next to the water for biking, for walking, pedestrians, and all that. One thing that we are working hard to do, though, is to ensure that those pathways belong to the city and that they are always open. When you get next door to the Cooper Hotel, it's my understanding that the walkway that goes in front of the Cooper, nice when it's open, but they have the right to close it for private events. And so we want to be sure that the walkway that is on the water's edge here is always open to the public and never subject to closure for special events for certain people. We think it ought to be open to the public. And then to follow up, he also mentions, how does this compare with other world-class cities? That is our inspiration. We believe that we have the opportunity here to do something that marks Charleston's place as one of the most historic, productive harbors in our nation's history, that is comparable to the best plans, but that are really at its heart Charleston. We don't want the Port of Miami at Charleston Harbor. That would be out of place, out of scale, out of the scope of what we have come to recognize as our signature of being Charleston. And so I think it's important, though, to say we want the best minds to come together. The Preservation Society has done a great work for us in terms of looking at other alternatives. And we presented some of those alternatives to the Ports Authority, but they persist with their plan, which is to build out almost every square inch, to create buildings that have corners that are over the critical line, to ignore the buffers that everyone else is required to adhere to when they're building new construction. The only reason historic Charleston is not included is because those buildings pre-existed the code. And so we think it's important to think through the utility, the advisability of building huge buildings with their edges on the critical line at the very edge of this section. And so, all that's allowable is not advisable. And so we hope that we'll take a lesson from other cities, that we'll learn from our own experiences with flooding and stormwater, that we will adhere to the things we find out through the Dutch dialogues, through our work with the water plan, through our efforts on resilience, to make this the best that it can be. We've only got one chance to get this right. This is it. And so we have to leave a legacy for the next generation. We don't want to ruin it. We don't want to spoil it for the kids that are coming behind us. And we want it to be safe for all those kids now when they go across this park. And so last but not least, I want to mention that on Thursday, Preservation Society, Historic Charleston Society, and the Coastal Conservation League, our three partner organizations, will have a conversation with Vince Graham, who will facilitate that discussion. So we'll have a longer conversation at that event on Thursday. Hope to see you then.
Thanks again, Faith. That was a great question to close on. And thanks again to everyone for joining us in this discussion and for these really thoughtful questions. Another reminder, please do mark your calendars for June 7th at 5 p.m. and plan to attend that Planning Commission meeting. This will be one of the best opportunities to share your hopes and concerns for the project with decision makers in the near future. As I mentioned, if you're not able to be there in person, you can submit comments online, and there will be other opportunities, but this is the biggest and best coming up here soon. We will keep you up to speed as the project continues to take shape. So keep an eye out for more updates and future opportunities from us to engage on this redevelopment of Union Pier. And as Faith mentioned, the Conservation League, Historic Charleston, and the Preservation Society of Charleston are all participating in an advocacy forum on Thursday, May 18th, and we'll continue much of this dialogue. And if you'd like to talk more with us and other local groups about this project and focus specifically again on the environmental impacts from a much broader community perspective, please join us at Tradesman Brewing on June 1st. We'll be there to chat more. With that, I thank everyone one more time for being here. Take care and have a great evening.
Thanks, everyone.